Aníbal Quijano's work, Coloniality of Power, Eurocentrism, and Latin America, 2000, is a foundational text in decolonial studies and critical Latin American thought. Quijano explores the persistent effects of European colonialism on modern structures of power, knowledge, and social classification. He introduces the concept of the coloniality of power, arguing that although formal colonialism ended in Latin America during the 19th century, the underlying power structures and hierarchies established during colonization continue to shape global and local social, economic, and cultural relations. 1. Coloniality versus colonialism. Quijano differentiates between colonialism and coloniality. Colonialism refers to the historical process of conquest and occupation by European powers. Coloniality, however, is a deeper, enduring matrix of power that persists beyond formal independence. It manifests in how societies are organized, how knowledge is produced, and how social hierarchies are maintained. Coloniality permeates power, knowledge, and being, creating a systematic Eurocentric worldview that prioritizes European norms, values, and experiences as universal. 2. Coloniality of power. Quijano's central contribution is the concept of the coloniality of power, which explains how European colonial domination created enduring structures of social stratification. 1. Racial classification. Quijano emphasizes that the modern concept of race emerged in Latin America during colonization. Colonial powers categorized populations hierarchically based on racial mixtures, mestizos, mulattoes, indigenous, African descendants. These racial categories were tied to access to labor, land, and privileges, forming the basis of social and political control. 2. Labor and economy. Coloniality of power structured labor systems and economic exploitation along racial lines. Indigenous peoples and Africans were positioned at the bottom of the economic hierarchy, while European settlers and their descendants dominated land ownership and economic power. 3. Authority and politics. Political authority and governance structures in the colonies reflected European models, consolidating a power hierarchy that prioritized European descended elites. This legacy persists in contemporary Latin American states, where social inequality often correlates with ethnic and racial divisions. 3. Eurocentrism. Quijano critiques Eurocentrism, the belief that European history, culture, and values are universal and superior. Knowledge production. European thought dominates the global epistemological framework, marginalizing non-European forms of knowledge. Sciences, philosophy, and historiography are framed as universal, while indigenous and local knowledge systems are devalued or ignored. Historical narrative. Eurocentrism shapes how history is written and remembered, often portraying colonized peoples as passive subjects or inferior. Latin America's historical contributions are interpreted through a European lens, limiting self-understanding and cultural autonomy. Cultural hegemony. Eurocentrism enforces cultural norms, values, and aesthetics, making European models the standard of modernity, civilization, and progress. 4. The modern world system and coloniality. Quijano situates coloniality within the modern world system, linking colonial legacies to global capitalism. The expansion of European capitalism relied on the racialized labor hierarchy established in the colonies. The modern state and international order are structured around these colonial hierarchies, reproducing inequalities between the global North and South. Coloniality is thus inseparable from contemporary economic and political inequalities. 5. Knowledge, identity, and subjectivity. Quijano emphasizes that coloniality affects not only social and economic relations but also subjectivity and identity. Epistemic domination. Knowledge systems constructed under coloniality shape how people understand themselves and others. Indigenous and African-descended populations internalize European definitions of civilization, modernity, and rationality. Identity formation. Coloniality imposed hierarchical social categories, influencing racial, ethnic, and cultural identity formation. Latin American identity continues to be contested, negotiated, and hybrid, reflecting the ongoing impact of coloniality. 6. Decolonial implications. Quijano's framework calls for a decolonial approach to knowledge and power. Epistemic plurality. Recognize and validate non-European knowledge systems and ways of knowing. Challenge Eurocentric epistemologies that dominate education, research, and cultural production. Social transformation. Address persistent inequalities rooted in racial and ethnic hierarchies. Promote policies and practices that dismantle structural oppression created by coloniality. Cultural revaluation. Encourage Latin American societies to rediscover and assert their historical and cultural legacies. Reshape national identities and global narratives beyond European frameworks. 7. Key contributions. Quijano's work is seminal for several reasons. 1. Introduces coloniality of power. Provides a conceptual framework to analyze post-colonial inequality and social stratification. 2. Links history and modernity. Shows that colonial structures underpin the modern global system, challenging simplistic notions of progress. 3. Critiques Eurocentrism. Exposes the epistemic and cultural dominance of Europe in shaping global knowledge, history, and identity. 4. Offers decolonial pathways. Suggests practical and theoretical approaches to decolonize knowledge, social structures, and culture. 8. Relevance today. Quijano's ideas are central to decolonial studies, Latin American critical thought, and postcolonial theory. They illuminate contemporary issues, such as racial inequality, social exclusion, epistemic injustice, and the persistence of Eurocentric norms in education, governance, and global relations. The framework of coloniality of power is applied beyond Latin America, influencing scholars analyzing Africa, Asia, and indigenous contexts worldwide. 9. Critiques and discussions. While widely influential, Quijano's work has generated debates. Emphasis on coloniality. Some critics argue that focusing heavily on colonial legacies may understate local agency and resistance. Eurocentrism scope. Others question whether Eurocentrism alone explains all forms of global inequality, suggesting that local political, economic, and cultural factors also play a significant role. Nevertheless, his framework remains a critical tool for understanding how historical processes shape contemporary social, political, and epistemic realities. Conclusion. Aníbal Quijano's Coloniality of Power, Eurocentrism, and Latin America, 2000, offers a profound analysis of the lingering effects of colonialism. By distinguishing between colonialism and coloniality, highlighting the racialized social hierarchy, and critiquing Eurocentrism, Quijano provides a conceptual lens to understand ongoing inequalities in Latin America and beyond. His work is foundational for decolonial thinking, emphasizing the need to rethink power, knowledge, and identity beyond Eurocentric paradigms and to challenge persistent structures of domination rooted in colonial history.